Yes.
So I feel like there have been a lot of mixed signals coming from the PRC in terms of its stance on the Ukraine situation. At times they've talked about the importance of state sovereignty. At other times they've railed against NATO expansion. Has the State Department been in communication with PRC interlocutors seeking clarity on their position? And have you laid out any ways in which these ongoing signals might undercut U.S.-China ties? And on a related note, you've kind of hinted before that if the PRC were to seek to undermine the impact of U.S. sanctions on Russia, then the U.S. would have countermeasures. Have those discussions continued with PRC interlocutors?
Well, as you know, Secretary Blinken had an opportunity to speak to his counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang, just the other night. And one of the two primary topics they discussed was Russia's the crisis that Russia has needlessly precipitated with Ukraine and with the rest of the world. Secretary Blinken, and we issued a readout, the PRC also issued their own readout, but you saw in our readout that the Secretary made very clear where we stand in terms of our unwavering support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and its sovereignty. And I think especially that last point, sovereignty, should be an element that the PRC understands quite well. We often in statecraft hear the PRC cite this principle of sovereignty, which in any number of instances they have claimed should be inviolable, should be sacrosanct, should be one of the foundational rules that countries abide by and respect. So you'll have to ask the PRC how they marry that long-standing position with anything less than an effort to use the considerable influence and sway they have with the Russian Federation to urge Vladimir Putin to back down, to de-escalate. Whether they are doing that, you'll have to ask them. But we did see in the readout that our PRC counterparts are also calling for the situation to be resolved diplomatically and to be resolved peacefully. Now, whether Putin heeds that call, I think that is not something we yet know.
What about relaying the potential impact on U.S.-China relations?
Look, in terms of our bilateral relationship with,
in terms of China's support for Russia and its railing against NATO expansion and the potential tacit endorsement that provides, what's the impact of that on U.S.-China relations?
Well, we believe, and we've made this point not only about the PRC, but every responsible country in the world has, in our estimation, an obligation to use any influence it has with the Russian Federation to urge, to incentivize, to advocate for Vladimir Putin to back down, for the Russian Federation to de-escalate. Again, you will have to ask the PRC whether they have used their own considerable influence with the Russian Federation to that end. Of course, we've all read the 5,000-word joint communique, and we can glean our own conclusions from that. I think what gives us concern is that from that manifesto and from what we've seen not only in recent days, weeks, and months, but in recent years, is this growing partnership between Russia and the PRC. And I say it's concerning because we talk about a rules-based international order, that has been at the crux of 7+ decades of unprecedented levels of stability, of security, of prosperity the world over, whether that's in Europe or the Indo-Pacific and places in between. It is true, we think, that Russia and the PRC also want a world order. This is a vision that they appear to be developing together, if you read that communique. But this is an order that is and would be profoundly illiberal, an order that stands in contrast to the system that countries around the world, including, by the way, Russia and in some ways the PRC, have built over the last 7 decades. It is an order that is in many ways destructive rather than additive. So that is, as we see this relationship develop, and we've seen something that gives us great concern. And of course, in recent days, we've seen Russia reach out to its autocratic counterparts in other corners of the globe. This gets back to one of the core points that the president has been making since before he assumed high office. And that is increasingly, we are seeing the world divided between democracy and autocracy. It is and has been a charge of this president and this administration's foreign policy to act to unite our democratic colleagues around the world, to act in unison, to galvanize collective action. And I think whether the challenge has been what Russia is doing, whether the challenge has been what the PRC is doing, what we are seeing from state and non-state actors around the world, you've seen us succeed in that. But it will continue to be an animating principle as we continue to see the forces of autocracy, the forces of authoritarianism, the forces of illiberalism continue to work together and attempt to combine forces. But the other point, even as they try to do that, we are confident. We are confident in our own abilities. We are confident in our abilities as an international community, and whether that's the West, whether that's a community of democracies, whether it is our system of alliances and partnerships that span the globe. And we're confident for a number of reasons. If you look at it quantitatively, we have 50% plus of global GDP. We have a large share of the world's population. China and Russia, in terms of their GDP, are what, 20% of global GDP? We have innovation, we have entrepreneurship, we have a shared set of values that we really think are a core instrument of national power. And we know that when we put all of this together, especially when we act with our allies and our partners, as we've done in the face of the challenge that Russia has posed, in the face of the challenge to the rules-based international system that the PRC has posed, or even when you talk about the threats and challenges that we face that are not state actors, climate change, COVID, economic recovery. We know that acting together, we are situated to take on any threat, to seize any opportunity. And that's really been the driving force of our foreign policy. It's why Secretary Blinken spent so much time of his first year in office repairing, revitalizing, in some ways reimagining the system of alliances and partnerships. And you are seeing the dividends of that now play out, even in recent hours.
Well, first of all, can you guess how long that answer was? How many
I
minutes that was?
I'm sure you will tell me.
I can't because my otter seems to have like frozen here.
I hope you pay for the premium version.
But if you're boasting about how reinventing it and you're seeing the fruits of all that labor now, you're talking about the united reaction
the united response of the international community.
Russia.